Hello, everyone.
Hello, Jacob.
How you guys doing? Here we are in Seattle, Washington. But not too long ago, in December 11th, 1971, Colorado Springs, there was a group of people that had a vision, that saw a duopoly, that knew that there was a huge portion of the populace that wasn't being spoken for. And these people realized that everything from cronyism to racist laws to taking away as much as they could, they decided to form an organization that would act like a party, to give us leverage to face the tyrannical government that was growing in our nation eye to eye. We, Libertarians, were the first to stand up for the decriminalization of cannabis. We were the first to say, it is none of the government's business who we love and who we marry. We were the first to say that there should be no crimes that are victimless. And we were the first to say, stop all wars. Quit killing people. It's none of our business. How many here actually want war? Because I'll tell you what, I own a marijuana store very close to the Canadian border. And I have talked to not only American citizens, Canadian citizens, but citizens across the world. I'm honored for that. And these people all say the same thing. I don't care what country you come from. I don't care the color of your skin. I don't care your sexual orientation. We all know what is right and wrong. And the Libertarians, us, have been saying this from day one. This is why it is so important that we stop voting out of fear for the other one that they might get the vote. It's never throwing away your vote when you're using that unalienable right of freedom of speech. We need to put our foot down, as a dad would say, and say no more. To say we need another voice in DC. And I have waited a long time to see somebody that I would be willing to stand up here, which I can't stand, by the way, anybody that knows me, I am a reluctant leader, and to be able to speak with whole heart for a person that would run as president under the Libertarian banner. This woman is amazing. She brings not only hope to my heart, she also brings something the other two don't. And I'd like to point something out to everyone here that doesn't know. That might not know, unless you have Facebook and you've seen Libertarian posts constantly about it. Joe Biden was quoted in, let me see, wrong page, sorry. Joe Biden was quoted in 1977 saying, the non-orderly radical integration of policies would cause his children to grow up in a radical jungle of race. Do we not have anybody to vote for that isn't a racist? That isn't a bigot? That doesn't want to violate women's rights to their own bodies? We do. We do. She's right here. She speaks for all Americans. She speaks for all countries. And who else? A woman with a psychology degree? Maybe so. Maybe so. And how about putting her on the ice? Sorry, I grew up with hockey. That gets me excited. I don't know about the rest of you. A hockey player? Yeah, take the gloves off, Joe. Take the gloves off. Then we have Trump, who's speedingly, before he's out of office, arresting as many people off the streets as he possibly can right now as we speak. And they're disappearing for using their freedom of speech. Right now, in just 1 week, he moved through on executing 3 people sitting on death row as fast as he could. Now, whether you sit on the line with that or not, doesn't it make you want to think, I'm responsible for killing somebody that potentially could be innocent? And I say 1 innocent life is too many. I know for a fact that Joe will repeal all of this. You've heard a lot of good things about Joe, and I had them written down, but they've already been spoken to. But what I can say was when I was at National Convention, Joe and I had a lengthy conversation. And anybody that knows me, I generally don't drink alcohol, but it was an honor to sit down with her. She's smiling at me. And drink with her. And people down in the lobby got to know why I don't drink very often after that. So I'm a party guy. But here's what I learned about Joe on a personal level that night. She is a human being. She's not a part of the elite. She doesn't hold herself above anyone. She respects your rights, your unalienable rights, which, by the way, that was carefully worded in the Declaration of Independence, which actually means they are non-transferable. That means even if you wanted to be a slave, you can't give those away. That means you own yourself 100%. And then that is what the party stands for, and that is what Joe definitely stands for. This woman is so full of integrity that I can't even begin to speak how much I love this woman. And I don't want to make my wife jealous, but man, she is awesome. I just, I'm out of words because it's hot and I want you guys to hear her more than you hear me. But when it comes down to the individual, I know Joe judges you not on your status, not on your race, your creed, your religion, your lack of a religion. She judges you on your own merits as an individual. And don't we need somebody in the White House like that? Thank you. It is my honor and my privilege to introduce the next president of the United States, Joe Jorgensen.
Thank you so much for that welcome. I don't think I can top my introduction. I'm not sure what to do here, but Washington has just been great. Let me start with a story about Washington. So last April, a single mother in Seattle got terrifying news that her 22-year-old daughter had tested positive for coronavirus. She suffers from an autoimmune disorder and is at increased risk. I can hold it too. Can I give you this to give to thank you. I assume you got that part. This mom and daughter work side by side at a restaurant, and Washington's stay-at-home mandate had already cut their hours. Forced into quarantine, their income fell to zero. Their rent was due and the bills continued to pile up, but they had no money to pay them. It wasn't the government who stepped in to help, it was the community. Individuals. Neighbors called to see when they needed something from the grocery store, and they left food on the porch for them. Friends called every day just to check on them, and their church offered support. This single mom will tell you that the pandemic is bringing out the best in us. But when I hear the story, I think it's another example of people, not government, getting things done. This story reminds me of my grandmother. She was a humble woman of limited means, In her home country of Denmark, she told me that the government took their money. She longed for the American dream, a place where people were free to live their best lives and keep what they earned. It was my grandmother's vision of liberty and the basic principles of the Libertarian Party that bring me here today. I've been crisscrossing America advocating for change. Everywhere I go, people tell me their stories. And you know what I hear? The old way isn't working. It's time for real change. That's why I'm asking you to vote for me for President of the United States. As your president, I will get government out of the way so that my grandmother's vision of the American dream can be reality for all of us. Our current government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, too intrusive. We need to put the decision-making power back into your hands because you can spend your money better than any special interests, lobbyists, or bureaucrats in Washington can. We cannot claim to be the land of the free when we lead the world in incarcerations. We have 5% of the world's population, but house 20% of its prisoners. Between those incarcerated and those under parole or probation, 7 million people in the U.S. are under some kind of control by the correction industry. That's 1 out of 50 Americans. One of our biggest factors that led to that is, since 1980, is in quadrupling this, the racist and destructive war on drugs. Although states incarcerate the majority of people in the prison, in the U.S., any reform has to start at the federal level, and it's the president's job to lead the way. Fewer than 5% of federal prisoners' most serious convictions were violent offenses. Meanwhile, drug offenses are the primary conviction for half of the federal prison population. Immigration and weapons offenses counted for another 25%. In particular, mandatory minimums have taken the discretion out of the hands of judges and instead forced mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters to be put in jail for 10, 20 years, even for a life, for a supposed crime that has no victim. All we have to do is take a step back to the Prohibition era to see the parallels. Despite realizing how poorly alcohol prohibition went, we have replaced it with a carbon copy. Drug kingpins have replaced mob bosses, and drug dens have replaced speakeasies. Have you ever heard of a liquor store owner wandering up and down the halls of a high school trying to sell gin to high school students? Have you ever heard of people breaking into houses to support a vodka habit? Have you ever heard of 2 competing liquor stores having a shootout over who's got the best corner? What we have is not a drug problem. What we have is a prohibition problem. There should be no law to prevent you from owning an object, whether it's a gun to protect yourself or drugs for whatever reason you wish. Our criminal justice system does not treat people equally. While Black Americans are less than 14% of the population, they represent 40% of federal drug offenders and total federal prison inmates. This is in spite of the fact that Black and white Americans use drugs at the same rate. As your president, I will federally decriminalize all drugs and encourage states to treat drug use as a health issue, not a criminal issue. If there is no victim, there is no crime. I will pardon anyone convicted at the federal level of victimless crimes and instead allow the medical community to deal with substance abuse issues in a way that salvages lives, not throw them away. This is just one step toward ending the over-incarceration of people of color, letting consensual adult activities become safer and destigmatized, and allowing those who are true victims of addiction and violent crime to be recognized so they can be given the help they need. In addition to overcrowding our federal prisons, the war on drugs has negatively affected our communities and the interactions that many people have with the police. Drug gangs have been created and empowered by the fact that they operate in an underground market. Because they don't sell their products like any other business, they police themselves, and too often, violence is the result. Consequently, the federal government has created a police state, including the DEA, which receives over $3 billion of our tax dollars annually. They have repeatedly raided medical marijuana clinics in states where medical marijuana is completely legal. They have blocked efforts to allow more research into the medical purposes of marijuana because of its status of a Class 1 narcotic. They have, on many occasions, held Americans in prison. They have begun unconstitutional surveillance of Black Lives Matter protests. As your president, I will defund federal involvement in policing, including the DEA, which instead of protecting and serving, imports nameless, faceless SWAT teams to our streets. I will end civil asset forfeiture, which has stolen billions every year from Americans who, in most cases, are never even charged with a crime and cannot afford the expensive legal battles necessary to get their possessions back. I will end the supplying of surplus military equipment like tanks and tear gas to over 8,000 federal, state, and local police forces, which has made Americans feel like enemy combatants in their own neighborhoods. As your president, I will end no-knock raids, which too often end up killing innocent bystanders like Breonna Taylor. And I will end qualified immunity so that good citizens can take legal action against police brutality when it becomes necessary. These are not toothless half measures made to appease special interests. These are real changes that affect real people. While millions of Americans have suffered from government's war on drugs, almost every American has suffered from the COVID-19 pandemic in some way. On January 20th, the first person in the United States was diagnosed with coronavirus right here in the state of Washington. Since then, the federal government has failed at every turn and completely mismanaged the situation. On the other hand, South Korea confirmed its first coronavirus within a day of our first case and quickly jumped ahead in testing containing the spread. As infections in the U.S. skyrocketed, South Korea nearly eradicated COVID-19, and they did it without any lockdowns. Meanwhile, here in Washington, SCAN, the Seattle Coronavirus Assessment Network, was first to roll out tests in the U.S. which could be conducted outside of hospitals. Over the course of 10 weeks, SCAN had processed 20,000 tests and helped to reveal which communities in Seattle were being hit the hardest. Financially supported by Bill Gates, it had already navigated a host of regulations and had gotten approval from the state. But on May 12th, the FDA stopped SCAN from further testing and said that they needed further assessment. And I'm sure you're all familiar with Dr. Helen Chu, who only because she defied the federal government was able to mitigate the spread, not with the help of the government, but in defiance of the government. This is just one example of how the FDA has worsened the COVID-19 crisis and made it extremely difficult for anyone to get tested. This nationwide health crisis has shown us the true face of government bureaucracy. Currently, only those companies with enough money and resources are able to even get FDA approval, and once they do, they weaponize their patents to hold a monopoly. It costs about $1 billion to bring a drug to market, and the FDA creates a process that drags on for over 10 years for every drug produced. Meanwhile, it's the patients who suffer, desperately waiting for drugs that just might save their lives. When I am your president, I will get rid of the efficacy requirement of the FDA, if not the FDA entirely, so that new medications and procedures get to patients as quickly and safely as possible. I will also make over-the-counter drugs more available. It is time to eliminate the arbitrary FDA barriers and allow patients the choices they deserve. The FDA is not the only issue with the American healthcare system. Let's be honest, it's not working for anyone. My heart breaks for the millions of Americans who have been left behind, those whose families have been bankrupted. For decades, politicians in Washington, D.C. have insisted that it's the fault of the free market. Therefore, we need to go to a single-payer system. Well, I have some news for them. We haven't had anything close to a free market in nearly a century. The alternative to our current big government failure isn't an even bigger government failure. When politicians say we need Medicare for all, what I hear is VA hospital for all. The VA hospital is among the worst of our healthcare system. In 2014, the VA falsified data to show compliance with its very own deadlines, and many died before even receiving care. This top-down monopoly is unacceptable for any person, let alone those who are willing to sacrifice their lives for our country. We cannot wait for government bureaucrats to decide who lives and dies. We must create real change that puts control back in the hands of the people, in the hands of the patient. As I see it, the biggest issues are at the very core of the American healthcare system. The problem is that our insurance isn't actual insurance at all. In any other industry, insurance only pays for unexpected costs, and because of that, costs remain low, relatively low. Meanwhile, our broken healthcare system pays for everything and removes all accountability. Just think how expensive your car insurance would be if it paid for gas, oil changes, or car washes. You would have no reason to shop around for the best gasoline prices, and all of those mechanics and gas stations could increase prices without you even knowing. Why? Because the car insurance companies don't care, because they're the ones who get paid the big dollars in the end anyway. This is exactly what has happened with our healthcare system. There is absolutely no incentive to look for better prices, and as a result, healthcare providers have no reason to compete. Insurance companies can charge higher prices without any accountability, and we're left footing the bill. The best example of how a market-based healthcare system can operate is in Singapore, which reserves the use of insurance for catastrophic care. In 2014, Singapore spent less than a third per person on healthcare as the United States. In addition, I will work to remove any federal hurdles for charities to help the community. A lot of people don't realize that people simply can't just help others because the law doesn't allow it. Once again, it's the same old thing. The federal government gets in the way of people helping other people. VA health care should be converted to a system like the one used in the state of Indiana, so that veterans are given control over their health care dollars and may decide how to use them. There are soldiers currently deployed who weren't even born when the war on terror began. So it's not just the healthcare industry that lets our soldiers down, it's our national military. In the time since the war on terror began, over 150,000 people have died in Afghanistan, including 40,000 civilians. In Iraq, 300,000 people, including 200,000 civilians. In Pakistan, 23,000 civilians were killed and 65,000 people total. The U.S. spends more on military than the next 10 countries combined, and we are in nearly 150 countries around the globe. Our government has increasingly engaged in drone warfare, even striking weddings and hospitals. The names and faces of war change, but the problems remain the same. Nation building and regime change create power vacuums and greater distrust of the United States, and we are left to deal with the same issues over and over again. In every election, candidates promise peace, but they only deliver more war. If I am elected president, my first official act will be to bring the troops home. I want to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. Our military must be trained to defend our shores, but we have to stop meddling in the world and make peace with our world neighbors. Another issue I'd like to address is the environment. We hold an obligation to future generations to end government support of fossil fuels. The federal government gives about $15 billion annually to oil and coal companies. And this doesn't even include the billions in tax credits and the cheap public land leases, which disproportionately go to these companies. This is nothing but corporate welfare, taking from the poor and giving to the wealthy. Currently, red tape prevents cleaner and more sustainable energy from entering the marketplace. The most promising is nuclear, whose carbon footprint is vastly outmatched by its efficiency. I will work with Congress to end all energy subsidies and level the playing field. I will also reduce regulations that prevent competition and that unfairly entrench the older forms of energy. It's time to make energy companies invest in innovation instead of more lobbyists. The IRS taxes Americans at every turn, and the tax system is so complicated that only those who can afford personal accountants and tax lawyers can even navigate the code. The same IRS that taxes us to death looks and probes at every detail of Americans' financial lives to decide how much they should pay. Meanwhile, the government itself accumulates more debt. Now, some demand increases in domestic spending, while others demand increases in military spending. So what do? They come to a bipartisan compromise by increasing both. As your president, my veto pen is going to need extra ink. This irresponsible borrowing and spending was epitomized by the $2 billion, or rather $2 trillion, it's hard to keep track, $2 trillion CARES Act, which in our country's most dire time of need was filled with waste and gave billions in corporate handouts. Some of you may have received a $1,200 check, but 90% of that spending went to government cronies and special interests. This runaway spending is made possible by the Federal Reserve. When the federal government isn't able to raise taxes, it simply prints more money to spend on its many pet projects and overwhelmingly benefit the rich. At the same time, poor and middle-class Americans see the value of their dollars lessened as the government imposes this invisible tax. Without any backing, the value of our dollars have lessened every year. Since the Fed was created over a century ago, the American dollar has lost 96% of its value. As your president, I will first audit and then end the Federal Reserve. I will reduce regulations to allow cryptocurrency and any other form of industry to enter the market. I will also eliminate the IRS and work with Congress towards eliminating the federal income tax altogether. It's time to move money out of the government sector and back to the people who earned it. Politicians and bureaucrats don't know what you need. You do. When it comes to cutting spending, we cannot take any solutions off the table. I would encourage baseline budgeting. Instead of assuming an increase, we start at zero every year, and then we decide what can be eliminated and what is vital. It's time for the government to balance its checkbook in the same way American families do. Given the challenges we face as a country, it's easy to feel like the kind of change I'm talking about just can't happen. But I believe it can because I believe in you. I believe in the individuals who make up our great country. We aren't the first to face adversity, and we certainly won't be the last. I do know that if we keep doing the things that we've been doing, nothing will change. And real change is exactly what we need. I see America through my grandmother's eyes, a place where the rights of the individual are greater than the power of the government, a place where liberty means minimum government and maximum freedom, a place where the American dream isn't a dream at all. It's real and it's right there in front of you because you made it happen. Thank you so very much.